Hello, my name is Andy Way. I am a professor in computing at Dublin City University and the Deputy Director of the Adapt Centre for Digital Content Technology. I'm very pleased to be here today using online technology for the first time, recording in PowerPoint. Never done this before, so let's cross my fingers and hope that it works. So it's afternoon in Dublin and sort of breakfast TV. This will be if you're on the West Coast in the US, and hopefully I'll be sending you to sleep in Tokyo with sweet dreams of machine translation. So delighted to be here today. Thank you to Steve and Olga and Ben for inviting me. And I've been asked to talk about machine translation developments in the EU. So here's an overview of the talk. Just very briefly, just start off so that we all understand, what the starting point is. So what is the EU and what is the language situation currently in Europe? And I'll talk about what resources are available for anybody to download a sizable repository of language technology resources, and the eTranslation machine translation system, which has been developed over the last number of years for use by a number of public administrations and European citizens throughout Europe. Obviously, the European Commission gives funding for machine translation and related projects, so I'll talk about some highlight projects there and give you a prognosis for future funding possibilities for machine translation going forward. Throughout the talk, I will talk about the specific situation vis-a-vis Irish. And I'm not just doing this because I happen to be in Ireland. I've been in Ireland now for 30 years plus, and I'm interested in Irish machine translation myself. Anybody who was giving this talk would have to point out the anomalies with respect to Irish in the EU, but things are coming to a head, and a solution needs to be contemplated fairly soon. So we will talk about that. And then lastly, obviously I'm joining you remotely today. Would much rather be with you face to face. But there are a number of upcoming conferences in Europe that you may be tempted to join, having been given a little teaser by myself today. So the EU has 24 official languages. There you can see them on the slide. And as I say, Irish is an official language, but not yet a working language of the EU. So I'll come back to that later on. If you type in EU languages, you get to the official EU page, and you can actually listen to any of these languages. So if you haven't heard them before, I invite you to do that. It's quite enlightening. So what about the indigenous or regional or minority languages then? And many of them are included in the little box there on the right-hand side of this screen. There's a nice field guide that you can download for free as a PDF using that link there. But you can see there a number of indigenous languages or minority languages spoken by around 40 million people throughout Europe. So some of these include Welsh, Sami, Breton, Faroese, etc. So there are 49 languages which are featured actually in this guide that you can, as I say, freely download. So having spoken, a few months ago with Steve Richardson, the idea of asking me to give this talk, I think, are rooted in a presentation that Spiros Pilos, there you can see him on the slide, gave back in 2015 at the AMTA summit in Miami. So that was an occasion where we actually managed to get face-to-face in Florida. Unfortunately, it wasn't possible this time. And Spiros at the time spoke about automated translation and connecting Europe through the EU bodies. So I've just pinched one of his slides here, slide 9 in his deck, just to illustrate at the time the number of translators who were employed throughout Europe, but really to focus on the EU bodies in which translation needs to be done. I'm not sure what the current numbers are, but they've probably gone up. But certainly the number of official EU bodies will have certainly remained the same, if not grown itself. So just based on Spiros's numbers there in 2015, over 6,000 translators working, human translators working in one EU body or another. So as I said at the outset, the EU makes available a number of language resources and translation resources, for anyone to download. You don't have to be just a European citizen. And one of those, one of the most significant ones, is the Euramis DGT translation memory. So Euramis is the European Advanced Multilingual Information System, and you can see here the numbers in 2007 when this was first put together, and how the Euramis translation memory has grown since that point. So the second the second column from the right gives you the updates for each language in that time, and you can see that during that time most languages have had added between 2 and 5 million translation units. The outlier for a number of reasons here is Irish. So if you look at the rightmost column, you can see there are 131 million translation units in the Euramis DGT translation memory, and the paucity of resources for Irish sticks out like a sore thumb. So as we saw on the previous slide, the DGT TM is available for download. But many of you will at some time or other have downloaded the JRC Acquis, the Multilingual Parallel Corpus, which is an approximation of the Acquis Communautaire, the total body of EU law applicable in the member states from the 1950s up to the current time of speaking. And again, for all EU languages except for Irish. The DCEP, the Digital Corpus of the European Parliament, contains the majority of documents published on the European Parliament's official website and comprises a variety of document types, for example, press releases, session and legislative documents, all related to the European Parliament's activities and bodies. And the current version of the corpus contains documents that were produced between 2001 and 2012. And again, many of you previously would have downloaded Philip Kuhn's Europile corpus at some time or other for MT engine training or other uses. A nice paper which describes the difference, the range and the difference between each of these resources can be seen on the right hand side of the slide there, by Ralf Steinberger et al. And this paper ended up in one of our esteemed journals in the field, Language Resource Evaluation, back in 2014. So you can download that and learn a lot more about these resources. And if you visit that website there on the left hand side at the bottom, you can download any one of the resources for your own use at your own volition. So back in 2015, Spiros talked about CEF.AT, which was a precursor, if you like, to the eTranslation MT system. And of course, Spiros was working for the DGT at the time, and if Steve, Olga, and Ben had really wanted a talk, concentrating solely on eTranslation, then they would have invited Marcus Foti or Andres Eisler or somebody else in the team to give the talk. But I think it's appropriate, for me to give you a quick overview of the eTranslation MT system, as a lot of the projects that many of us have been involved in throughout Europe have been supporting the developmental efforts of eTranslation in the round. And we've begun recently ourselves in Ireland, we've begun to explore ways in which we might be able to collaborate with the DGT and eTranslation team on Irish. So as you can see on the left-hand side, you can translate to and from 27 languages. So just last week, after I'd already made these slides, Turkish was added. So you can add Turkish to that, so you've now got 28. And simplified Chinese is also a language that you can. So back in 2015, Spiros talked about CEF.AT, which was a precursor to the eTranslation MT system. And of course, Spiros was working for the DGT at the time, and if Steve, Olga, and Ben had really wanted a talk, concentrating solely on eTranslation, then they would have invited Marcus Foti or Andras Eisler or somebody else in the team to give the talk. But I think it's appropriate, for me to give you a quick overview of the eTranslation MT system, as a lot of the projects that many of us have been involved in throughout Europe have been supporting the developmental efforts of eTranslation in the round. And we've begun recently ourselves in Ireland, we've begun to explore ways in which we might be able to collaborate with the DGT and eTranslation team. And here's the interface for eTranslation. We created a login myself as a EU user, so I could see what the UI looked like. And here it is on the screen. And for some time, I think it's fair to say, the policy in the DGT eTranslation team was to build sort of large generic MT systems built from all of the corpora that they could find for specific language pairs. But as you can see on the next screen, you can now pick a particular domain. Some examples here. If you hopefully you can all read this, but there's general EU formal language, Court of Justice, case law, Deutsche Bundesbank, Neuro MT, Ministère des Finances in France, etc., etc. So the main eTranslation engine I know is trained on the Euramis translation memory that I've already talked about. But I don't personally know whether domain adaptation is performed or whether a completely different engine is used when one of these domains is selected. So on this slide, you can see the translation volume back in 2012. So 1.7 million pages altogether were pushed through the various systems. As you can see, mostly into English, then French, German, Italian, Spanish were the most popular target languages. But again, all languages had a reasonable amount of throughput, except for Irish again. So I'll keep coming back to the point that Irish in many cases is an outlier, and I'll come back to the reasons for this later on. Situation now. This is a recent screen grab from the eTranslation pages. Just in the first half of 2020, eTranslation received almost 180 million translation requests and 150 million just 8 years. So as well as providing language resources and the eTranslation platform, obviously the Commission for some time now has been funding projects in the area of machine translation, and the main funding platform through over the last number of years has been called Horizon 2020. And I'm going to focus towards the end of the talk more on the CEF-funded projects, the Connecting Europe Facility funded projects that Spiros talked about back in 2015. But some other projects are worth highlighting, I think, for you today also. And some of them, like the ELG, the European Language Grid, are infrastructural projects which cut across many countries. And this is designed to support the multilingual digital single market, to grow a vibrant European language technology community, to help coordinate all European language technology activities, and create a powerful, scalable language technology platform using a grid architecture. And essentially, what the ELG is trying to do is to be the primary platform for language technologies in Europe. Now, as a sort of related topic, there have been pleas in the European Parliament for all European languages to be treated with some level of equality. So we recently responded to a call for proposals and put forward a project called European Language Equality, ELE, closely linked with the ELG project here. I'm the coordinator of that project. It's currently under review, and we hope to have good news by the end of the month. And if that gets funded, again, we would hope that it will be able to influence future EU funding calls and create more opportunities for MT researchers and SMEs throughout Europe. Other projects are more sort of traditional, small consortium-based projects like this Bergamo project here with Edinburgh University as the coordinator and partners, Charles University in Prague, Sheffield, University of Tartu, and Mozilla, the web browser company. So as it says on the slide, the aim is to empower citizens to preserve their privacy by embedding MT in a well-known browser like Firefox. Obviously, this is a topic of keen interest to many citizens, not just in Europe at the moment. We're all concerned about privacy as our data tends to be used for more and more nefarious applications that we did not foresee, and we certainly did not intend to give consent for when we signed up for various services. So for this particular project, the best people to contact if you want more information would be Ken Heafield or Philip Kuhn for more information. There's the URL there on the top right of the screen. So another project here is the European Live Translator project coordinated by André Boyard of Charles University in Prague, with the partners there you can see on the slide: Edinburgh again, KIT in Karlsruhe in Germany, Per Voice and Alpha Training, and an affiliated party in the project, the Czech Republic Supreme Audit Office. So again, combining ASR and machine translation, they want to do automatic subtitling and interpreting, both in face-to-face meetings as well as remote conferences like this one, and also have automatic minuting as part of that. So again, the best person to contact would be André, who most of you know well. Some of the most prestigious EU projects at the moment are the personal ERC awards, the European Research Council Awards, because these are awarded to the researcher independent of their current institution. So if you are, for example, an associate professor and you get one of these ERC awards, you have very strong sort of bargaining, you have a very strong bargaining chip to negotiate with your host institution, because if they don't play ball, and another competing academic institution makes you a suitably generous offer, you can walk away with your ERC grant to that new institution. So these are great projects to get, very, very hard to achieve, looking to fund sort of blue sky research, and quite different from old style EU projects, which were very conservative with demonstrable deliverables. These are much more, try something, different and see, whether we can make some sort of, novel breakthroughs, which might lead to sort of paradigm shifts in the field. So Lucia, you can see there on the screen, you all know Lucia very well. Her project is about multimodal processing and has about 9 months left to run. The slides are available. You can read what's on the left-hand side of the screen. I'm not going to read that out, but obviously contact Lucia for more information. A second ERC-funded project, I'm only aware of 3 in machine translation and related areas, is Andre Martin's project called Deep spin. Now, Andre is head of research at Umbabel in Lisbon, and his project is all about structured prediction. And as we all know nowadays, given that the fundamental architecture that we use is similar for many application areas, the good thing is that if you can tweak the models and improve the models, you can examine the results across a range of different disciplines. So, Andre seeks to ground his results in machine translation, quality estimation, and dependency parsing. So contact Andre for more information about that. And the third one that I'm aware of under ERC featuring machine translation is a recently awarded project to Marta Costayusa, whom some of you will know from UCB Barcelona. And again, fortunately, I'm going to do some joint work with Marta on this project. As I say, it's only just been awarded, so this is still to be fully worked out. But on the broad topic of lifelong learning and machine translation, it looks like we have some common interests in the areas of incremental retraining and examining the effect of legacy training material on MT performance. So I'm looking forward to some exciting collaborative research there. So other prestigious individual projects at postdoc level are the Marie Curie fellowships. And here's one I'm co-supervising, a postdoc, Natalia Rezende, in DCU. And Natalia is examining the effect of machine translation in language learning. And of course, this is quite relevant nowadays, given how many of our kids use online machine translation to do their language homework. But, we're interested in trying to measure is the effect of MT on L2 acquisition. So if machine translation is employing certain constructs in order to produce its target language outputs, and those are a little bit different from what you might learn formally in a language class, then obviously we want to measure the influence of MT in that regard on how those students are actually acquiring that language. So here's another Marie Curie funded postdoc project, SEBAMAT, on semantics-based machine translation. Features George Tambouratsis and Athens. Again, like the project, this is not mainstream MT. That's not what most people are sort of concentrating on at the moment, and that's a good thing. So it's premised on the fact that in neuro-machine translation, translations are typically fluent, but often semantically completely inadequate. And again, what Georg and Reinhard want to look at is old style, if you like, old-fashioned techniques like word sense disambiguation, but also something that I've been hoping that somebody would do for quite some time now, actually annotating corpora semantically, with semantic role information, for example. And again, that has a resonance with some of us who've been around the block a little bit with old style, if you like, rule-based machine translation, and especially an interlingual MT. So CEF, Connecting Europe Facility, is a key EU funding instrument to promote growth, jobs and competitiveness through targeted infrastructure investment at European level in 3 different areas: transport, energy and digital services. And these projects started in 2016, and they're essentially smallish consortia, quite short term, 36 months, 2 years max, but decent amounts of funding. And the nice thing about them is that the project officers are much more hands-off than in previous FP7 projects, which were quite tightly controlled by the project officers. A lot of reporting involved, and there's much less micromanagement in these CEF-funded projects. So you can see here in 2016, 6 projects were funded across different digital service infrastructures, DSIs, so things like e-procurement, e-justice, etc. And we were ourselves in DCU involved in 2 projects: iAdapter, which constructed an online translation exchange with verified MT engine quality, and the Ellery project. And again, I'll talk about that more on a subsequent slide, the European Language Resource Infrastructure Project. Many of the projects, as you can see, focus on data collection or infrastructural projects, and many project partners appear in many different projects. So, you know, once you get to know how to write a successful CEF project, it's relatively straightforward then to respond to future calls and be successful in future projects. So, you know, many project partners such as Pangianic, Tilda, Cantan, Crosslang, ourselves, and DCU have been successful across many different CEF calls. So in 2017, you can see here, there, but I think there's another one on the next slide. 5 different projects. In 2018, you can see there are seven projects were funded, including the principal project that I am coordinating. Again, I'll focus in more detail on a later slide on that. And in 2019, 6 projects again were funded. And as data collection efforts increase, you know, a number of themes are emerging, such as, you know, specific use cases here. You can see patents, you can see the EU Council presidency, for example, topics such as anonymization feature, topics, projects funded on terminology, etc. So a number of, you know, recurring themes. If we just focus on one of those projects here, the Occam project, you know, this one features synchronous OCR and machine translation. So this is not novel at all. You know, many of us have tried this before, but these are not supposed to be research projects. It's much more about putting together pre-existing technology, which has been tried and tested for a reasonably quick win-win. So we go to the next slide. The next project is focused on curating multilingual language resources for Eastern European languages. And this is essentially to provide additional training data for the eTranslation engines that you've seen before. And essentially, in my opinion, you know, projects like these are an unofficial admission. The data collection efforts are far better concentrated in the countries themselves where the data resides. Especially in smaller EU countries, academic teams know where these public data collections are likely to be and can access the data controllers in those public institutions in their own language, and, you know, in pre-COVID times, you know, face to face. And these efforts work far better than anonymous centralized data collection efforts like ERC share. And our ELRI project that I mentioned before was in a very similar vein. So in the ELRI project, we focused on creating parallel data in 4 countries, and also we constructed what we called national relay stations. These were, you know, stations for where data could be uploaded, cleaned, and perhaps transformed into TMX format and returned to the data providers, you know, to make their pre-existing data more useful for them internally. And of course, we subsequently passed that data to eTranslation via ELRC share for improved engine training. And, you know, the principal project, you know, as I already mentioned, builds on ELRI. I'm coordinating this project. And again, there's more data collection for Irish, as well as for 3 other targeted low resource languages in the call: Icelandic, Croatian, and Norwegian. And that we collect is then validated by Iconic in their MT system building. So the premise here is that if the additional data that we collect improves MT performance in e-justice or the e-procurement DSIs, then we can be quite sure that when it is uploaded to eTranslation, that their engine performance should improve correspondingly. Now, an additional benefit of the early adopters making data available is the building and free use until the end of the project in a year's time of a bespoke MT system by Iconic. So all throughout this talk, I featured on the special case of Irish that runs through the story that I'm trying to give you today. Now, as I say, I've been in the country for more than 30 years, and I have a special interest in the issue from many perspectives. Obviously, I'm interested in the language. I'm interested as a researcher who can perhaps help in terms of building machine translation systems. But I'm also interested as a taxpayer whose pocket might be affected if we fail to meet our targets as a country. So here are the facts. Irish is an official language of the EU, but not a working language. So it's not used on a day-to-day basis, or if it is used on a day-to-day basis, it's used to a far lesser extent than all of the other official languages of the EU. Now, Ireland joined the EU in 1973, but Irish was only recognised as an official language back in 2005. And for the next 15 years, it obtained a special derogation compared to all of the other official EU languages, where it only had to translate into Irish a fraction of the documents that all of the other 23 official languages had to. But that is coming to an end quite soon. By the end of next year, the 31st of December 2021, that special derogation for the Irish language ends. And so on the very next day, Irish becomes a full working language of the EU. And all legislation enacted from that time will be translated into Irish, just like is the case for all of the other EU official languages. So why did Irish then obtain this derogation? Well, despite the fact that it's the first national language, as you saw on the previous slide, as you can see from the first bullet point here, not many people actually speak it as their native language. Just 1.7% of the total population back in the 2016 census said that they speak Irish on a daily basis. Now, everybody learns Irish at school, and everyone can say a few words. Even blow-ins like myself can say a few words and recognize a few words. But there just aren't enough highly qualified human translators to meet the demand, the expected demand post 2021. And it's worth pointing out that unfortunately the previous campaigns have been relatively unsuccessful. So when they have tried to persuade people to come and work for the European bodies, those campaigns were quite unsuccessful, because that actually meant that people would have to relocate to Brussels or to Luxembourg. And as you can see over on the other side, of the screen, underneath the picture there, what recent announcements. This is a page from the Irish Times back in February this year. People can now remain in Ireland. You can see here it says that they are trying to recruit translators for work in Brussels, but also in County Meath in Ireland. So while the fourth bullet point here on the slide says that there are 209 individuals who are available on a full-time basis, clearly they're not all available full-time to work solely for the European Commission. There's a lot of other Irish translation that needs doing, and so they can't all work on EU translation full-time. So what we've come up with, as is often the case in Ireland, is an Irish solution to an Irish problem. So some translators will be able to work from Ireland, and this is not really a general solution for any other EU language, but to try to attract translators, it has to be done. These translators who would, ordinarily make themselves available to do this work, they don't want to uproot themselves and their families, and go and live in Brussels or in Luxembourg. They want to continue living in the Gaeltacht, Irish-speaking areas in the west of Ireland, and remain, in an Irish-speaking environment. So I think this is a sensible, compromise that is likely to prove attractive to many Irish-speaking translators. Nonetheless, even if this recruitment drive is even partially successful, it's an open question as to whether there will be sufficient human translators to meet the envisaged demand. So what we've been doing over the last number of years is we built an Irish MT system called Tapadóir. Megan Dowling, my PhD student, is just about to present her PhD thesis at the end of the month, has been working on this for 4 or 5 years. And again, this was hosted and integrated into the Irish translators in the Department of Arts, Heritage and the Gaeltacht, the department responsible for the Irish-speaking community, and was integrated into the Irish translators Trados translation memory system by our partners, Iconic. And user trials have shown improved throughput for all translators, and none of them came back with any negative comments about having to post-edit machine translation rather than translate from scratch. And this, has shown sort of demonstrable societal impact in Ireland so far. So many Irish speakers have been able to obtain government information in Irish, their language of choice, rather than have to access it through English, albeit a language that they all speak. But of course, they would prefer not to have to get the information they require through English, and would much prefer if that information were available through Irish. And as I said at the outset, we've begun to explore collaboration with the DGT. So as the end of the derogation sort of looms ever closer in sight, the DGT themselves have been to Ireland to meet with us in DCU. We train translators in the MA in Translation Studies and MSc in Translation Technology, that people that like Sharon O'Brien and Joss Morkins and Dorothy Kenny would teach on. But they also came to talk to us about our MT system and our Irish language corpus initiatives. And again, clearly, what they're looking for is, how we might be able to help them provide support to Irish language translators and interpreters in preparation for the end of the derogation, from January 2022. And then more recently, again, only last month, we had a very good and fruitful discussion between, Marcus and Andreas and the fellow eTranslation designers and our DCU Irish MT team regarding things like data sharing and potential research and development collaboration. So the signs are good. Now, of course, there are other significant players. So back in January, Microsoft Translator launched a new neural system. And again, I was happy as somebody interested in machine translation to endorse this when it was released, and provided a couple of quotes to support this initiative. And like many of us, we wear different hats at different times depending on who we're talking to. And if you contrast the situation in Ireland, or for Irish, with the Welsh Assembly, Microsoft came in and offered an MT system for Welsh, connected in with Trados, and something similar could be done, of course, for Irish. One of the big sort of multinationals could come in and offer a solution to the Irish government and also to the European Commission with respect to Irish. But I think this would be, a political football that the Commission would not want to put into play. They complain sort of loud and often that all the main global tech players are non-EU. And so I think if the Commission were to follow suit and just deploy a system offered by one of those sort of multinational companies, that would send out, let's say politely, a very mixed signal. So I have to hope that that will be unlikely. So the situation with respect to further funding for translation is positive. I've already spoken about the ELE initiative that we hope will be funded fairly soon. But again, from a document that you can all access, this document, Digital Europe Draft Orientations for the Preparation of the Work Programme 2021 to 22. Translation is featured in a number of places, not just with respect to AI in general, but also language technologies as called out specifically. And again, I've highlighted some of the specific terms on the right-hand side of the slide, where you can see translation and localization. Many of you would know already that pretty much all software localization for all multinational companies has been done in Ireland, mostly in Dublin, for the last 25 years or so. You can see that data collection and aggregation is important, and multilingual services in general. And again, to speak to the point that I made on the previous slide, while Europe does not have the main players in the space, it has a very rich SME culture. So, if you examine this document, a lot of the use cases will be sort of verified by European SMEs. So finally, then, just to finish off, I've tried to give URLs, and I've listed the contact persons where you can find out more information about the various projects and initiatives. But here are some events, taking place quite soon where you can find out even more. So, as I said at the outset, I'm speaking on behalf of the government track here at AMTA. So this one might be especially relevant because this workshop featured on the slide here, taking place next week. We'll focus on the latest governmental language technology applications to support communication and multilinguality in the public sector across Europe, a lot of which I've highlighted already in this talk, which allows public services and administrations and citizens to communicate across border, and provides insights into the adaptation of eTranslation as part of the German EU Council presidency translator, for example, and presents new solutions for automatic post editing, crowdsourcing, and chatbots for government use cases. So a lot of different things there are likely to be of interest. So on the next slide, is a conference the very next day, the second CEF eTranslation conference. So I spoke a lot about CEF and eTranslation, so this is for you if you want to find out more. On the next slide, you can see the actual dedicated program. Topics are included are eTranslation and some of its use cases, featuring talks by academics and industry experts, many of whom you will undoubtedly know. Of course, for most of these events, for both of these events, you would need to register. I don't know if there's a limit, so do try and get in as soon as you can if you're interested. So, of course, we'd all hope to be in Florida for AMTA and in Lisbon, as you can see here, for EAMT 2020. We did have the EAMT planning event in Lisbon in January, which was nice. So I have gotten out of the house, in the early part of the year. But of course, like yourselves, unfortunately, we've had to go online, just like you've done. But there are benefits too, of course. Higher attendance is likely, cheaper registration, fewer carbon emissions, so it's not all bad. So on the left-hand side, you can see the different tracks, a research track, a translators track, and a user track. So there's something for everybody there. There's also a projects track, so there are 22 project descriptions, some of which I've presented today, featured at EAMT. And of course, in advance of the conference, we've made the proceedings available, so you can already download the proceedings. The conference web address is the same as the proceedings one, minus the proceedings-EAMT2020.pdf part, so you can register for the conference and, in advance of that, read 500 pages of papers on machine translation. Note also that if you're attending the AMTA conference, you are a registered AMTA member, which would mean that you can register for EAMT at the member rate. And it's not too late to do so, and we welcome you at our online conference fairly soon. So that's all I had to say. Thanks for bearing with me. I hope this was useful to some of you and that you learned something new about the situation regarding machine translation in Europe. Thanks again to everybody for inviting me, and I think now we're going to switch